It's semifinal week here for your fantasy playoffs, and we got you covered on fantasy football today. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Heath Cummings. Joining us once again, it's our buddy Dan Schneier. Everybody around the league is replacing quarterbacks. We replaced our running back. No Robert Turbin for this week. We got Dan Schneier stepping in. So this is Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sports book born in Vegas. There are a lot of quarterback changes happening in Week 16, and we spent some time on our Fantasy Football Today podcast talking about how it just feels like the position kind of stinks this week with some of the bad matchups and some of the quarterbacks that are going to be replaced. I just want to read you the list of the quarterback changes that may be happening or have already happening. So you have Kirk Cousins stepping in for Kirk Cousins getting benched, Michael Penix starting for the Falcons. You got Jameis Winston getting benched, Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting for the Browns. You got Tommy DeVito most likely out, Drew Lock most likely back in. The Titans are most likely going to start Mason Rudolph. Will Levis is going to get benched. We're still waiting to find out about Kansas City if Patrick Mahomes is going to start. We're still waiting to find out about the Raiders if Aiden O'Connell is going to start. The Saints are probably going to start Spencer Rattler. I mean, this is crazy going into the stretch run of the NFL season and obviously the final couple of weeks of the fantasy season. So let's start with the situation in Atlanta, which is obviously the big story with Michael Penix starting and Kirk Cousins getting benched. So Heath, in terms of just Penix by himself, a lot of people asked us questions today, Penix versus whatever quarterback it may be. You know, it started with Lamar Jackson all the way down. How excited or maybe concerned are you about Penix in what should be a good matchup against the Giants, but we don't just know how much they're going to throw?
Right. I want to qualify this. I think the Falcons are making the right choice.
Okay.
Like, it's obvious you can't play Kirk Cousins the way that he looks right now. But a rookie quarterback making his first start in the fantasy football semifinals, that's not the way that I want to go out. We've talked about how bad Kirk Cousins has been over the last month. He's averaged 7.3 yards per pass attempt. He's averaged 220 passing yards per game. Those sound a lot like what you might expect from a rookie. Now you're talking about a game where they're 8.5-point favorites. First off, imagine being an 8.5-point underdog to a 500 team starting a rookie quarterback for the first time. That's where the Giants are at. But I think you might see 25 pass attempts from Michael Penix. I would not expect those pass attempts to be very efficient. I do not want to start him.
Dan, how do you feel? It's your Giants they're taking on.
I'll overlook the fact that Heath just took a shot. I would call it unnecessary at the Giants there, but he did take his shot, and it's a Heath thing, and I respect it, and I'm here for it. I will say this, of all the quarterback changes, this is the one we should be most excited about from a fantasy standpoint. I look at Zach Robinson and some of the things he did earlier in the year that worked and were successful, and how he was hamstrung by Cousins later in the year. So I expect to see a different offensive look from the Falcons. I think that's what they're excited about. With that, and the Giants' defense is an absolute mess. All of their best players are injured, and they had multiple breakdowns in the secondary last week. So everything is set up for Penix to surprise, but I think Heath said it best. We're looking at the fantasy semifinals. There's just that trust factor we have here, and this offense has gotten very run-heavy now. Is that because of Cousins and how much he's limited that offense? We'll find that out. I'd rather not gamble on that in my fantasy semifinals as well.
Are you changing your outlook for Drake London, for Darnell Mooney, for Kyle Pitts because of this, knowing that we may see some more downfield throws? We may see some more explosive plays, but we also may see, some inaccurate throws as well.
Right. For the most part, no. I was starting London before. I'm starting London now. I didn't want to start anyone else before. I don't want to start anyone else now. I did actually downgrade London and Mooney just a little bit in terms of where they're ranked because I don't project as many total pass attempts. As bad as things have been for London over the last few weeks, he also had a game where he saw 16 targets in the game. All of Kirk Cousins' passes were going to Drake London. And the problem with Mooney is that over the last month, Ray McLeod has seen more targets than he has.
All right, so Dan, now you get to return the favor. I agree with you. I'm still starting Drake London. Darnell Mooney is a little bit more of a concern. Kyle Pitts is obviously what he is at this point. Let's go to a different team now, and you get to return the favor, Dan. We're going to talk about the Chiefs, Heath's team. So Patrick Mahomes is expected to play at this point. When they listed him as a full participant in practice, even though it wasn't an actual practice, that's a great sign that he's going to be out there for Saturday after he injured his ankle in Week 15 against Cleveland. How do you view Mahomes for this week, taking on a Houston defense that just got 3 interceptions against Tua Tagovailoa, and you know they're going to get after the quarterback? They're number 2 in sacks of the opposing quarterback on the season. So do you like Mahomes this week in the fantasy semifinals?
I'll never be able to return the favor to Heath. He has that over me for the rest of his life as a Chiefs fan, and I doubt that much will ever change. But as far as fantasy goes with Mahomes this week, it's not setting up for a great week for Mahomes. Obviously, if he does play, he's healthy enough to play. I think it's a risk for Kansas City, but they are gunning for that 1 seed. And like you said, Jamie, this Houston defense has played unbelievable football as of late, especially in the passing game. I saw yesterday Houston has allowed the fewest explosive pass plays in the NFL. Not that the Chiefs are creating many explosive pass plays themselves. So I feel like he's more of a QB2 for this week in this match, especially outside in the cold. I don't think it's setting up great for him. And honestly, to me, I'm a little nervous for the Kansas City. If you're in a desperation spot, you're starting Worthy based on the recent target uptick, or Hopkins just as a desperation touchdown play. Well, what if Hollywood Brown does play, and he's practicing in full, I think, for this week? So that's going to complicate things there further as well. I don't think I can trust even Kelsey as a tight end for this matchup. I'm really spinning out when it comes to the Chiefs from a fantasy standpoint.
So it was almost 2 years ago, Patrick Mahomes suffered a very similar injury against the Jacksonville Jaguars in the playoffs. He said this one's not as bad as that one. When he suffered that one, 7 days later, he threw for 326 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Bengals. I think he's fine. I'm not that worried about him. Now, he's not been a must-start quarterback over the second half of the season anyway, so he's not a must-start quarterback. He's a borderline top 12 guy. I really struggle with him and Tua, with him and Purdy, with him and even Anthony Richardson, like in that range right around QB 12. But yeah, high in QB 2, low in QB 1.
Yeah, he's a little lower for me just because I do think that the Texans, with the tackle situation being what it is for the Chiefs, I know they did some things. They moved Tooney to the left tackle, and that may have helped a little bit against Myles Garrett. But this is a team that gets after the quarterback very well. They've done a nice job in terms of defending the pass, at least the last couple of weeks. And I think just based on the numbers from Mahomes, you right. alluded to this, it's been 3 straight games under 20 fantasy points. He started to tick up a little bit, where he was looking like maybe a must-start guy again. But given his body of work, given the defense, I'm a little bit concerned. And in terms of the guys here, I think, Dan set it up best. Like the receivers are, kind of borderline options. I don't think a lot of people can afford to bench Kelsey if you don't have somebody that's like, you're not benching Kelsey for Brenton Strange at this point. So I don't think you can get Strange in that regard. But hopefully Kelsey can do a little bit better than what we saw last week against Cleveland. Hopkins, touchdown or bust. Worthy getting a lot more touches, a lot more opportunities. So he's my favorite of the group. And then we will find out if Marquise Brown is able to return. Just keep an eye on the practice status there for him. Let's go now to Tennessee, and I'll start with you, Heath, because Will Levis getting benched for Mason Rudolph. Rudolph looked good at times this year. 19 fantasy points against the Bengals, 21 plus points in the last 2 starts that he had. Do you have any interest in Rudolph in Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues?
So this was the one that I would probably be, of the quarterback changes that we think are pretty certain, I would be most excited about, just because Will Levis has taken a sack on about 12% of his dropbacks this season. Mason Rudolph, it's been 3.5%. Just a completely different offensive environment when Rudolph's been playing quarterback. A lot more volume opportunity. So I think it's better for Calvin Ridley. He's a good number 3 wide receiver. It's probably not as good for Nick Westbrook-Akine, but I'd kind of ready to move on from him as it is. And if Tony Pollard's okay, I think it's a better offensive environment for him as well. I'm okay starting Rudolph as a number 2 QB over Penix.
Dan, just, follow up there on the weapons, because Ridley's been so tough to trust. And as we saw last week, when Rudolph took over, it was Chico Okonkwo. You see the numbers here: 10 targets, 8 catches, 59 yards. It was Tyjae Spears in the passing game. So he's sort of given us a little bit of a buffet of everybody, because Ridley and Westbrook-Akine were doing some nice things in the 2 previous times that Rudolph started. So how do you feel about the weapons here against the Colts defense that did get 3 interceptions last week against Bo Nix? They have the ability to be a good pass defense, not a great pass defense. So how do you view the weapons here for the Titans with the quarterback change?
I'm right along lines with Heath here, because it changes so much of the offense. Will Levis, when he was in, they did a lot of move the pocket, have him roll out, have him throw back, a lot of throwback plays, just different things to get him in space and then throwing the football, utilizing his arm talent. For Rudolph, it'll be more traditional drop back, which is, I think, a big reason why we saw Chig's targets uptick and his production uptick as well. I would probably upgrade him the most, to be honest. Ridley is somebody who you can maybe play as a flex wide receiver 3, and I think Heath nailed it with Westbrook-Akine. It's just like you can't play a guy who's a big play threat without Will Levis in there. So, yeah.
And we'll hopefully have an update for you on Tony Pollard, because it is one of those situations we have to monitor. Did not practice all last week. Ankle was bothering him clearly in that game, so helped Tyjae Spears, who did score 2 touchdowns. This situation scares me the most, and that's in Cleveland. It's Jameis Winston getting benched for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So, Dan, obviously you agree here. The one positive that, at least if you're looking at it, you're a desperate situation, super flex, 2 quarterback leagues, DTR will run, and the Bengals allow the most rushing yards per game to quarterbacks at 30.1. So obviously not a big number, but enough that could help him. He was bad in a couple starts last year as a rookie. He did not look great, came in through interception against the Chiefs. But let's talk about the passing options here for Cleveland. So, Dan, when you look at Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, if he plays, David Njoku, if he plays, for me, they're all downgrades. How do you feel about these guys?
It's funny, Jamie, because yesterday on Beyond the Box Score, we played a little game, and it was Jerry Jeudy verse. And for me, I'm very extreme in my take here. I would bench Jerry Jeudy in almost any spot this week, as well as all of the Cleveland pass catchers. I don't think this is as good a spot based on the matchup as others do. Yes, Cincinnati defense, it's struggling, but cold weather in Cincinnati that time of year and a divisional matchup, somebody who's seen this Kevin Stefanski offense. And everything I've seen from Dorian Thompson-Robinson tells me that he's not going to keep this offense on rhythm, on time. So a lot of the plays are going to have to be made out of structure, which should be good for Jeudy, but I'm not so necessarily sure that DTR has the arm talent to take advantage of what Judy's skill set is. And you look at it, I mean, there is no situation where you're having as much of a downgrade from realized air yardage with Jameis Winston to without Jameis Winston, especially going to DTR. So for me, it's very extreme. I'm benching all Brown skill players.
I'm moving closer to moving Jeudy down even more than I have so far right now. It's just hard when you've got a guy that over the last 2 months of the season has been the number 3 wide receiver in fantasy to just say, no, there's no chance I'm starting him. But Dorian Thompson-Robinson actually has a higher career interception rate than Jameis's interception rate this season. He's averaged 3.7 yards per pass attempt, which is about half of Jameis Winston. I'm still okay with Jerome Ford as an RB2. I think I'm ready to move Jerry Jeudy down into that low-end number 3 wide receiver range.
Do you go into this thinking that if he struggles, DTR struggles, they make a switch back to Jameis? You can't start your fantasy team that way,
right.
But there's that possibility.
I do like the fact that it was reported today that Jameis is going to be the backup. He's willing to serve as the backup. He's not asking to be released or anything. So I do think that like there's that hope, but it's just a hope.
Right. It's just it's so frustrating. Like here, like you said this on a couple of our shows last week, like, okay, maybe Jameis will struggle against Chiefs. That's fine. Yeah. Just get him to Cincinnati.
Right.
Get him to the Bengals game. Let's see what he can do. We got robbed of this matchup for Jameis Winston throwing the ball over the place against a defense that can't stop anything. And here we go. Just very frustrating. So, yeah, Jerry Jeudy, you said this on our show, number 5 receiver in fantasy. To not be able to trust him, I feel like even 27 is a little bit too high. So we may see him in the 30s in our rankings before we get to Sunday. All right, last one we're going to talk about here is the situation in Las Vegas. So Aiden O'Connell could return this week. So, Heath, in terms of this matchup, it's great. Jacksonville stinks. O'Connell, last time we saw him play a full game against the Chiefs, he was good, 23 fantasy points. Any interest in O'Connell in Superflex leagues? And how much more faith do you have in Jakobi Meyers and Brock Bowers after what Desmond Ridder did not help these guys do on Monday night?
So O'Connell is in the Mason Rudolph low-end QB2 range if you were desperate. I would probably start him over Michael Penix. I will call Jakobi Meyers a top 12 wide receiver if Aiden O'Connell's playing. He's more of a number 3 wide receiver if Desmond Ridder's the quarterback. Brock Bowers is either going to be tight end 2 or tight end 3. Either way, it doesn't matter. You're starting Brock Bowers.
Feel the same way, Dan? Are you concerned about maybe a gimpy O'Connell? I know the matchup's not anything to fear, but just the whole quarterback situation is a little bit dicey right now for the Raiders.
No, I'm definitely upgrading these players if O'Connell plays. And it looked like just from watching him in pregame warmups, he was close last week. So I think he will play in this matchup. It makes such a difference for both Bowers and Myers, in my mind at least. Desmond Ridder just can't simply keep that offense on time and in rhythm at all. I went back and watched the tape. It was very ugly. Now, his first start, we've seen that with Cooper Rush. Other these players, they have a little bit more time and they get a little bit better. Ridder's had a lot of opportunity at the NFL level, and I'm just not so sure he's there.
If only he threw a couple more passes to Jakobi Meyers and one less interception, I'd be a little bit happier this week. And Heath would be a little bit more sad, as you probably saw in our social media accounts. Heath beat me in a Dynasty League matchup on a Hail Mary interception that Jesse Bates caught, and I end up losing. Heath, hopefully you go on and win the entire league. All right, we're going to take a break right now here on Fantasy Football Today. When we come back, we're going to take a look at the roster trends and preview Thursday night's game. I know we usually do that a little bit sooner, but we want to get to all the quarterback news. So coming up, we'll preview Broncos-Chargers, show you the most added players. That's next on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I'm Jamie, that's Heath, that's Dan. We're taking a look at the Thursday night game, which is a huge game in terms of playoff implications between the Chargers and the Broncos. You got one team in Denver that is 9-5. The Chargers are 8-6. They're clinging to the playoff hopes right now, trying to hold off the Bengals, the Colts, the Dolphins. and we'll see how this game unfolds on Thursday from a fantasy perspective as we kick off the fantasy semifinals. So we'll start with the Broncos backfield. Heath, I'll start with you because Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, if he plays, Audric estimates, it's been a guessing game, and we'll find out if McLaughlin's able to go. He was upgraded from no practice on Monday to limited on Tuesday, so we'll see what his game designation is for the Chargers. Do you have any faith in any of these guys? And if McLaughlin doesn't play, who do you prefer out of Williams or Estimate?
So I don't have any faith in any of these guys, no matter who plays, unless maybe only one of them played. But that's not going to happen. If McLaughlin plays, I will like him the most, but he will not be a top 30 running back. If McLaughlin is out, I'll lean towards Javonte Williams because of the passing game work, but he also not a top 30 running back. I think he's RB 36 for me. I really hope you can do better.
It's just a really tough situation, and the Chargers, for the most part, have been good against opposing running backs, so it just feels like a complete situation to avoid altogether. But the passing game, however, Dan, is very interesting here because you have Bo Nix, who could have had a disastrous game last week against the Colts, threw 3 interceptions, but rallied with 3 touchdowns and had his most rushing yards since week 9, only 23, but clearly a step up from where he had been. Courtland Sutton's been a must-start wide receiver, but is there anybody else in the passing game, and give us your thoughts on Bo Nix taking on the Chargers, but is there anybody else besides Courtland Sutton that you would consider playing in week 16?
Maybe desperation. You can consider playing Vele or potentially Marvin Mims if you're in a non-PPR league. But I think I'm locking in on both Nix and Sutton to have big bounce-back games this week. Sutton obviously had the touchdown, but more receptions, more yards. And I had a chance on Beyond the Box Score to actually break down the Chargers-Bucks game. It was our game of the week. Watched it at length on tape. And this Chargers defense now is not the Chargers defense that's been there all year. You can't look at season-long stats. There were 3 massive breakdowns from a communication standpoint in the secondary that led to touchdowns for the Buccaneers. There was a massive breakdown from a communication standpoint in the run game as well that led to an 18-yard run from Bucky Irving and then a longer run later. So that defense is not playing well together. I think that Sean Payton and Bo Nix are going to be prepared for this and they're going to take advantage of this. So I see a big game coming for both Nix and Sutton, and I'm pretty excited for this one.
Nix did have 24.7 fantasy points in week 6. That included 61 yards rushing in that matchup. But if he gets back to using his legs a little bit more, that'll certainly help. I think he's a low-end number 1 quarterback. Obviously, Sutton, as we talked about, a must-start wide receiver. Let's talk about the Chargers passing game here, Heath, because I know you have a little bit of trepidation about Ladd McConkey. We will find out the defensive backs for the Broncos, who's in, who's out. It looks like Patrick Surtain should be good to go after hurting his ankle in week 15. And Riley Moss has missed the last 2 games with a knee injury, but he was upgraded to limited practice on Tuesday. But how do you feel about Justin Herbert and then the pass catchers, as you see here, with McConkey, Quentin Johnston, and the new tight end of the month, Stone Smart?
I've got a little bit of trepidation about this entire game, really. The last time these two teams played, I think it was 39 total points scored. The current over-under for this game is 42 total points. I don't want to start really either of the quarterbacks. Justin Herbert has been pretty much a QB2 for the season, a QB2 for the last 5 weeks. He had one really strong month in the middle of the year where he was throwing a lot and throwing really well. That didn't last, though, and I don't really want to bet on it happening against this very good Broncos defense. Ladd McConkey, in my mind, is a number 3 wide receiver. The last time these two teams played, he had 8 targets. He caught 4 of them for 43 yards. I think he'll be better than that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get like a 5 for 60, and what you need a touchdown for him to be a must-start option.
What we have seen from Herbert is he hasn't been running. That was kind of something that helped his fantasy production. He's got 13 rushing yards in his last 3 games, so he's just not using his legs. That ankle injury is probably something that's bothering him. McConkey, I think, is either going to be a borderline number 2 receiver or number 3 receiver, depending on what your team looks like. Quentin Johnston, to me, is almost hands-off if everybody's healthy for that backfield, defensive backfield for the Broncos. And then Smart just has gotten, 54 yards receiving and 50 yards receiving the last 2 games. One of those he stepped in for Will Dissly. So could be a desperation play at the tight end spot, but obviously not someone you want to completely rely on. Broncos about middle of the pack in terms of defense, fantasy points allowed against opposing tight ends. All right, Dan, you get the fun chore of breaking down the backfield here for the Chargers. So Gus Edwards just does nothing. Kamani Vidal does nothing. Is it worse than the Broncos backfield in this game?
Without a doubt, I think what I saw when I watched the tape was Gus Edwards really doing a poor job of following his blocking scheme. And really, from the Chargers standpoint, they really only got anything going when they ran a little bit of power gap to the outside. But one thing interesting was Vidal did play the third snap of the game, and I think this could signify an uptick in Vidal's snap share for this game and moving forward. I think he's more of a desperation play still. I don't think they're blocking it up well. They have injuries on the interior offensive line. I don't know if Zion Johnson is going to play. So it's more of a desperation play, but Gus Edwards would remain on my bench everywhere.
Yeah, just ugly situation since they lost J.K. Dobbins in that Ravens game. They have not found a suitable replacement. I'm with you. Played Kamani Vidal just to see what they have because Gus Edwards not getting the job done. All right, so there's your Broncos-Chargers preview. Again, we like Cortland Sutton. We like maybe Bo Nix. We like maybe Ladd McConkey. So we'll see how this game all unfolds on Thursday night. All right, let's take a look at the roster trends of the moves that you made on Tuesday. Could impact the waiver wire moves that you're making on Wednesday. And we're only going to show you the most added list because at this point, most dropped, most traded certainly doesn't matter here. But you see the running backs at the top. And I think those are the two most prominent players that we'll look at here. Brenton Strange, also somebody that we'll take a look at, and Jalen McMillan as well. But Heath, we talked about the Browns, and you said that Jerome Ford's a number 2 running back for you. How much do you like him against the Bengals?
I'm cautiously like him as a number 2 running back. He had a 40% rush share, a 14% target share earlier in the season when Nick Chubb was out. He has 3 rushes of at least 30 yards, so he has that big playability. You like that a lot. I do not like the quarterback change for anybody in this offense, including Ford, but it's still a pretty good matchup against the Bengals. I still think that he's unlikely. The one thing that's gone wrong with Ford a couple times is they've gotten frustrated with him, and then all of a sudden somebody else just gets 2 series in a row. That's unlikely to happen in this game. So I'd view him as a number 2, but it's not a high degree of confidence.
The nice thing about it is Logan Wilson's absence has been absolutely brutal for this Bengals run defense, which was not good at the start of the season. But in the last 5 games, 7 running backs have gotten to at least 10.4 PPR points or more. So that gives him a floor to at least be a flex. If he gets that 12 to 14 point range, he will be a number 2 running back. I am ranked as a number 2 running back, so I'm excited about him. You see Kendre Miller on this list. It's not necessarily a must-play option if there is no Alvin Kamara, but he would get those opportunities more so from a rushing standpoint than a passing standpoint. But you're talking about a backup quarterback, a backup running back going on the road to play a very good Green Bay team. So at best, a flex option for Kendre Miller. But then I want to ask you about Jalen McMillan because he got 13 targets in his last 2 games, and he's got 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games. It feels as if the Bucs have found their second receiver, their Chris Godwin replacement. Are you considering starting Jalen McMillan in Week 16 against the Cowboys?
Yeah, I'm definitely considering it. From watching that tape, he looked good out there, and Baker's building that trust in him, their rapport. They had some in-breakers that the timing was perfect on, which was something I was looking to see from them too. Just that example of an actual rapport being built. So maybe more of a flex play for me, desperation wide receiver 3, but I like the opportunity there. And Baker and Liam Cohen, they're running one of the better pass games in the NFL right now.
I would start him over Jaden Reed. I'd start him over DK Metcalf at this point, certainly over Deebo Samuel. Like, there's a lot to like about where Jalen McMillan is. And the matchup
over Jerry Jeudy or not?
I'm not there yet, but it's getting close. It's really getting close just because the quarterback situation matters a lot here, and Baker Mayfield's in a much better spot than DTR. Real quick, Heath, on Brenton Strange. A lot of people looking at what he did last week, where he was so involved in the passing game. Can he be a starting fantasy tight end against the Raiders in Week 16?
Well, listen, there's 10 tight ends who have averaged 10 fantasy points per game this season. 3 of them are not playing this week. So, yes, he can definitely be a starting tight end. I would caution against expecting the type of target volume that he had last week. He had 11 targets last week. He had 18 targets in 4 games combined earlier this year when Evan Ingram was out. But I think he probably gets 6 or 7 targets. I think he probably scores 8 to 10 PPR fantasy points. That makes him a low-end top 12 guy.
And that was a healthier receiving core weeks 2 through 4 when Ingram was out. Christian Kirk was healthy at that point. Gabe Davis was healthy at that point, and a quarterback that was going to challenge downfield a little bit more in Trevor Lawrence. So Mac Jones just wants to get the ball out, doesn't want to make a mistake, doesn't want to get sacked, as we know. So maybe that helps Brenton Strange against a Raiders defense that's top 5 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. All right, we're going to answer a bunch of your questions at the end of the show. Let's take one of them now here. Thank you for sending them to us using the hashtag AskFFT. Dan for Dan, I can't decide between the Denver or Atlanta defense. So Denver against the Chargers, the Falcons against the Giants. Dan, which DST are you taking?
Right now, I'm taking the Denver defense I mentioned earlier, but this Chargers interior offensive line is breaking down. There was even pressure with over the tackles last week. Now that's the Bucs. They had a 58% pressure rate despite not blitzing often. The Broncos defense may be better than the Bucs, so I'm going with Denver.
I can't decide also. I have one of them 6th, one of them 7th. I think I've moved them twice already, but I will lean towards the Falcons because when in doubt, go against the Giants.
It's always a good strategy at this point. We'll see who the quarterback is for the Giants. That may sway you, but I'll agree with
Drew
Heath.
Lock, it's going to be.
Yeah, I'll agree with Heath, and I'll go with the Falcons defense as well. They've been getting after the quarterback very well coming off their bye week, and I think Drew Lock behind that offensive line will probably get sacked and will probably turn the ball over as well. All right, we're going to take a break right now. We come back, we're going to play a new game. It's going to be called Higher or Lower. Nobody's played this before. I've never hosted this before, so we'll see how that goes next on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. We're playing a new game here. It's called Higher or Lower. I'm going to give the guys a fantasy point total, and we're going to see if they go higher or lower based on the CBS Sportsline projections. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but we're going to see how this goes. So I'm going to just throw out a number here, and they're going to see if it's higher or lower than the projections from Sportsline. All right, so we're going to start with Kyler Murray. The number is 20 fantasy points. So is Sportsline projecting Murray higher or lower in this week's matchup against the Panthers? Heath, you're up first.
So I'll 100% cheat here and use my own projections to answer. I'm going to say lower.
You're going to say lower than 20 fantasy
Yes.
points. Dan, is it higher or lower than 20 fantasy points from Sportsline?
Dan, no, just kidding. Higher. That's a throwback for some of that 50 listeners, but I'm going higher. Sportsline loves Murray in this matchup.
All right, so you're right. The Sportsline projection is 22.9. So, Dan, what do you think about Murray, who we have a lot of concerns about taking on the Panthers this week?
I am with you on those concerns. Sure, the matchup is tilted in his favor. I think over time, probably Sportsline has this on a full season projection. But I think there's a lot of rushing in the red zone that they've had success with the Cardinals. There's also the opportunity for this game script to get way out of hand to the point where the Cardinals will just be running the football for most of the second half. So I don't see it happening.
All right, we'll see how this goes here for Kyler Murray. One game in his last 4 with over 20 fantasy points. So he is due to help fantasy managers who have stuck with him getting to the fantasy semifinals. All right, we got Jared Goff outdoors at Chicago, 22 fantasy points. Dan, higher or lower from Sportsline?
Lower.
I agree, lower.
You're both all right. It's 21.1, so just below 22 points. Heath, he has not been good outdoors. And the Bears, you can run on the Bears. We know they just lost David Montgomery, but how do we feel about Jared Goff in this matchup? An MVP candidate coming off a 5-touchdown game. Are you trusting him in this game?
I'm probably trusting both him and Kyler Murray, and I feel almost exactly the same about him and Kyler Murray. There's genuine reasons to have concern, and the upside is just too high on a week where we really don't like the quarterback position to sit these guys.
Yeah, I agree. He's falling in my rankings. I actually moved Bo Nix ahead of him. I found some numbers on Bo Nix coming off a loss, so I think he's going to hopefully be better than Jared Goff, but it's tough to say that any of these quarterbacks that you'll see in this range are safer than Jared Goff, but just outdoors, he has not been the same type of quarterback. All right, last quarterback we'll talk about here is Anthony Richardson. The number is 18 fantasy points. Heath, you're up first. Is it higher or lower?
I'm going to go higher. I've got him at 18.5.
All right, 18.5 for you. Dan?
I'll go higher as well.
All right, you're both right. It's 20.4. So obviously Sportsline likes Anthony Richardson. You like him a little bit. Dan, how do you feel about Richardson in this matchup against the Titans?
I definitely like him over the projection of 18 points. I think this is an interesting spot for him. He could have a lot of opportunities if Mason Rudolph struggles. So I like the opportunity for him to get going on the ground here as well. So, yeah, I like Richardson this week.
I thought he was going to have a huge game last week when he scored a rushing touchdown on the opening drive.
Yeah.
He's going to have to use his legs. He did get back-to-back games with over 40 fantasy points. It's 4 games in a row now where he's giving you at least 6 points with just his rushing totals. But he's got to cut down on the interceptions. And I think this is a great matchup if he's able to throw the ball with some success. And for what it's worth, the Titans are top 4 in most rushing touchdowns allowed to opposing quarterbacks. So maybe he can find the end zone on the ground once again. Let's talk about some running backs here. We'll start with Chuba Hubbard. So the number is 14 PPR points. Dan, are you going higher or lower based on Sportsline?
Higher.
Higher.
Higher. You're both right. They like him at 16.9 PPR points for this matchup against the Cardinals. Heath, we've seen up and down performances from Hubbard lately. This is going to be one of the better ones in this Week 16 game.
Yeah, I think like last week was extremely disappointing, but the fact that Jonathan Brooks is not there anymore means that we have 25 touch upside for Chuba Hubbard on a given week. That went wrong last week because the game script got out of hand. Arizona's not really shown the ability to put anybody away like that. So I think this game stays competitive, and Chuba Hubbard's a top 12 running back.
And you did see the combination of Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson have good numbers against the Cardinals. Obviously, the week before that, it was Zach Charbonnet going off against them. So I think Hubbard's a good number 2 running back. I think 16.9, though, might be a little bit too high. All right, this guy we have some concerns about. Breece Hall, the number is 16 PPR points. So, Dan, you going higher or lower based on Sportsline's projections?
Lower.
Way lower.
You're both wrong. Sportsline likes him just slightly higher at 16.3 PPR points. So, Dan, when you look at Breece Hall, playing time was way down last week. Didn't practice all last week. I hope he's going to be able to practice this week. How do you feel about him in this matchup against the Rams?
Yeah, I think that playing time is the major issue here. Will the touches be there? It's kind of anyone's guess at this point. I don't foresee. He didn't look fully healthy to me, and I think it'll be a similar split to last week, maybe a little bit more of an uptick. If he didn't have that touchdown at the end, we'd be talking about this whole situation a lot differently. So I think I don't think he's going to outproduce the projection.
Yeah, let's hopefully get a full week of practice for him, and again, similar for Tony Pollard as well. All right, let's see how you guys feel about this. Next one is actually my start of the week with Bucky Irving. So the number is going to be 15 PPR points. Heath, are we going higher or lower from what Sportsline thinks?
I'm going to go lower.
Lower for Bucky Irving than 15. Okay. Dan?
I think lower from the projection standpoint.
You're both right. They actually like Rachaad White better than Bucky Irving this week. So, Heath, when you look at Irving taking on the Cowboys, they did a great job against Chuba Hubbard. But this Bucs run offense has been great. Bucky Irving's coming off a 100-yard game. How's he going to do?
I love Bucky Irving as a rusher. In this particular situation, you've got to project it pretty close to a 50-50 split, I think, between him and Rachaad White. So it probably comes down to he will be more efficient. How does he do in the passing game, and how many touchdowns does he score? With 1 touchdown, I think he's a good number 2 running back. He's a mid number 2 in my projections.
All right, he's a top 12 guy for me. I'm excited that he's healthy. Last week was a little bit of a concern. I wonder how much that played into the playing time scenario. And Rachaad White was coming off a much better game 2 weeks ago. So hopefully Bucky Irving goes back to what he was doing prior to the back injury. I just like the setup against that Cowboys run defense. Let's talk about some wide receivers now. Zay Flowers. So the number is 14 PPR points. Dan, is that higher or lower for Sportsline?
I think Sportsline will be lower than that.
14?
14.
I will go lower.
You will go lower. And Dan, you said higher?
Lower.
You're both wrong. It's higher. It's 15.1 PPR points. So keep in mind, Stephen O does our projections. He's a Ravens fan. That may play into this a little bit. But how do you feel about Zay Flowers against the Steelers?
He's one of those guys, and it's almost like Anthony Richardson. I wonder how many times these guys ever finish within like 5 points of their projection. He's either going to be 15 points better or 15 points worse, it seems like. This game, the over-under is slowly creeping down, I think, as people remember how these Ravens-Steelers games often go. So I'm a little worried about Flowers getting into the end zone. He's a number 3 wide receiver, but I don't have a lot of confidence in this week.
It feels like he hasn't had a big game since that Broncos game when he had a tough matchup. So he certainly due. And it's so funny with Lamar Jackson throwing 5 touchdowns, just having an unreal season that Zay Flowers' numbers have not popped. It's been more Rashad Bateman finding the end zone lately than Zay Flowers. Devontae Smith, the number is 15 PPR points. Heath, higher or lower based on Sportsline's projections?
I'm going to go lower.
Dan?
I am going to go higher on this one.
All right, it's actually lower. It's 14.6 PPR points. So taking on Washington. So, Dan, you a little bit concerned about Devontae Smith? Or are you excited about Devontae Smith?
No, I'm excited about this. I loved his volume last week. I felt like the Eagles did some things in the passing game that I hadn't seen from them all season, concepts-wise. So maybe they can carry that over. A divisional game gets me a little bit scared from an offensive standpoint in general, but I do think the tempo will be up, and I think the Eagles are finding something in their passing game through Devontae Smith. So I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, you wonder if they just decide they're going to do whatever they want to against Washington and throw the ball, run the ball, get Saquon Barkley going again, but hopefully Jalen Hurts and this volume stays to what it was last week, and that was certainly in Devontae Smith's favor. All right, one more receiver, then we got a tight end. Jordan Addison, the number is 13 PPR points. Heath, higher or lower based on Sportsline's projections?
Higher.
Higher for Addison than 13. Dan?
I'll go higher as well on this one.
All right, you're both right. It's 14.1, taking on a Seahawks defense that, for the most part, has gotten much better recently against the pass, but did give up 2 touchdowns to Romeo Doubs last week. Addison had a pass interference in the end zone that may have ended up in a touchdown, but how do you feel about Addison taking on Seattle?
I actually like him more than Devontae Smith. I like him more than Zay Flowers. I think he's a top 20 wide receiver. On a given week now, we almost don't know if Addison or Jefferson is going to be the better option in this pass offense. What I do know is I'm going to start both Addison and Jefferson every single week.
Yeah, it's just kind of gotten to that point, especially 2 of his last 4 games, over 30 PPR points for Addison. So he just needs to get back into the end zone, or maybe twice, or maybe 3 times, like we saw 2 weeks ago. All right, one tight end here, and then we'll answer a question of yours before we get to our next segment. Sam Laporta, 12 PPR points. Dan, is the Sportsline projection higher or lower?
It's going up. I'm going higher.
Higher than 12? What about you, Heath?
I'm trying to think how much Sportsline factors in the last week and a half, last 2 weeks, because I'm going to go lower.
All right, Heath, you're right. It is lower. It's 10.9. I actually like Laporta this week. Just a matter of can Goff get him going outdoors. How about you, Dan? What do you think?
I'm with you on that one. They've really changed their to the volume for Laporta in the last couple of weeks, and I think it could be upticking toward the playoffs.
Has he scored a touchdown outdoors yet in the NFL? I don't believe Sam Laporta scored a touchdown outdoors last year.
Interesting.
That is very interesting. I do think the Montgomery injury benefits him because that role in the passing game that Montgomery has sort of taken over a little bit. Clearly Gibbs will benefit. Maybe Craig Reynolds does also, but maybe it's 1 or 2 more catches for Laporta, and maybe he does get his first touchdown outdoors. So that's more of, I think, a PPR versus a non-PPR thing. We'll see how the Bears are able to defend this Lions offense. Again, the elements could be the biggest difference. All right, let's answer one of your questions here, and then we'll take a break. This one comes to us from Vince. Full PPR, please pick 2. Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, Bucky Irving. So I'm sure we'll all agree on who the odd man out is here, but Heath, who are the 2 you're taking?
I am starting Derrick Henry and Devon Achane.
Dan?
Yeah, I can't go away from that.
I do have Irving ranked 1 spot ahead of Derrick Henry because I'm a little concerned about Henry against the Steelers, but let's just make it easy and go with Henry. 1 spot shouldn't sway you to go against the consensus. So Derrick Henry, Devon Achane are the 2 running backs that Vince should start. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, it's everybody's favorite game. It's start, bench, cut. I don't know if Dan's played that yet, so we'll see how he does, taking on Heath, who's a veteran at who to start, who to sit, and who to kick off his roster. That's next on FFT. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. It's now time for start, bench, cut. We'll tell you who's going to be in your lineup, who's going to be on your bench, and who you might just have to cut to make room for somebody else in our fictional game. Let's start with the quarterbacks here, and the trio that we got is Aaron Rodgers, Sam Darnold, Jaden Daniels, Heath Cummings. Who you starting, who you benching, who you cutting?
I hate this game so much. The worst game ever. I like Azer's game so much better. Take that. I am starting Aaron Rodgers. I am benching Jaden Daniels. I am cutting Sam Darnold.
Oh, my God. Dan, set him straight.
I am never, ever benching Jaden Daniels, so I'll start him. I am benching Sam Darnold, actually, and cutting Aaron Rodgers.
I'm with you. So, Heath, why are you concerned about Jaden Daniels? Just the matchup against Philadelphia?
Just the matchup against Philadelphia. Their defense is so good right now. And he's still a top 12 quarterback. I also really like Aaron Rodgers. Over 289 yards each of his last 2 games. Didn't do that once the first 13 games of the season. His head coach says he's healthy now. You're seeing the real Aaron Rodgers.
And I can't believe we're overlooking Sam Darnold as the clear-cut starter here just because matchup's not awful, and he's been playing great. So, interesting decision here for a lot of fantasy managers. If you have to decide between maybe Daniels and Darnold, who's on your bench, or you decide to pick up Aaron Rodgers, I can't start Aaron Rodgers over these 2 guys. We'll see how this works out for Heath as the guy back in the old man. All right, running backs here. We got a trio of Isaac Guerendo, Tyrone Tracy Jr., and Jonathan Taylor. So, Dan, you're up first. Who you starting? Who you benching? Who you cutting?
I am going to be starting Isaac Guerendo. I'm going to be benching Jonathan Taylor, and Tyrone Tracy, unfortunately, I'm going to be cutting you. Lost his red zone role to Devin Singletary last week. I think that is due to the fumbles. He's off my list.
I think I will start. I'm going to start Tyrone Tracy. I'm going to bench Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to cut Isaac Guerendo.
Okay.
But so I do like the one thing that has made up for losing, or could make up for losing, the red zone role is the fact that Tyrone Tracy has 14 targets in his last 2 games.
He has been a little bit more involved in the passing game. We'll see if Drew Lock goes to him in the passing game. It's not the most difficult of matchups. I do think he's the one I'm going to cut also. I'm going to start Isaac Guerendo. I'm going to sit Jonathan Taylor. With the fumble last week. Come on. You're a veteran.
I lost a league because of it.
You got to know better than to do that. All right, trio wide receivers that we got here next. You got Brian Thomas Jr., Mike Evans, and Devontae Adams. I just love taking a look at Heath's rankings and making him squirm. So Heath, who you starting, who you benching, who you cutting here of Thomas, Evans, Adams?
So these are all in my top 8 this week.
I know.
So Brian Thomas will be my start. Mike Evans will be my bench. Devontae Adams just had one of the greatest halves of football that any wide receiver has ever played, and I have to cut him in this game.
And what's the number on Evans? How many to 1,000?
Evans needs to average 79 or 83.6 to get there, so he's going to do it.
He's going to do it. Yeah. Dan, what about you? Start, bench, cut. Thomas, Evans, Adams.
What a tough call this will be. I'm with Heath. These are all top 10 plays. I'm going to start Evans. I love the narrative. I love more so the rapport. They were working on all 3 levels, Baker and Evans last week. I'm going to bench Thomas, and then unfortunately, I guess I have to cut Devontae Adams.
Imagine saying that, but that's the rules of the game. I'm going to start Thomas. I'm going to bench Evans, and I'm going to cut Adams as well. Obviously, again, we're not doing that. You'd love to have these trio of wide receivers in Week 16. All right, next group of wide receivers. We got Juwan Jennings, DJ Moore, and T. Higgins. So, Dan, who you starting, who you benching, who you cutting of these 3 guys?
I am going to start Juwan Jennings, actually. I think it's a big bounce-back spot in a good weather game. Bench T. Higgins and cut DJ Moore.
I agree completely with Dan. I am starting Juwan Jennings, benching T. Higgins, and cutting DJ Moore.
All right, I'm going to start T. Higgins. This Browns defense does not scare anybody, certainly does not scare Joe Burrow. Jennings could see a little bit of Jalen Ramsey. That might be a little bit tough, but I think he's better. It's a little safer starter than DJ Moore. But Moore could honestly be the best of this group because the Lions are so beat up defensively. Just put Carlton Davis is out with a broken jaw. They lost another defensive lineman in McNeil, so it could be tough for the Lions across the board. All right, last trio we have here at tight end. We got Mark Andrews, Hunter Henry, Sam Laporta. So Heath, who you starting, who you benching, who you cutting?
I'm going to start Mark Andrews. I am going to sit Sam Laporta, and I will cut Hunter Henry.
Dan?
Starting Sam Laporta, benching Mark Andrews, who scored 0 touchdowns against the Steelers, and I am going to cut Hunter Henry.
Yeah, I'm with you with the same order, Dan. I think Laporta's locked in right now from a target perspective. Andrews, the touchdowns, if they go away, and again, he has never scored against the Steelers, he's going to be really brutal in this matchup. And Henry, just a little nervous the last couple of weeks with the targets going down. So Laporta is the starter for me as well. All right, take a break. When we come back, it's all of your questions to end the show. If you still want to get some of them in, again, use the hashtag AskFFT. That's next on Fantasy Football Today. Final segment for us here on Fantasy Football Today. It's all your questions. Anthony wants to know, who do I start in my flex in the semifinals? It's a 10-team PPR league. Cooper Kupp, Alvin Kamara if he plays, or Marvin Harrison Jr. Heath?
I will go with Cooper Kupp.
Even if Kamara plays?
I think even if Kamara plays, I'm going to be pretty worried with a groin injury that he plays. I think just long enough to get his 1,000 yards rushing, and then he's done.
All right, so a little concern there. Dan, same answer for you?
With the injury and with the quarterback situation.
All right, next question. Gene wants to know, happy holidays. We appreciate that. Quarterback, pick one. Kyler Murray, Bo Nix, or Sam Darnold. Dan, I'll go with you on that one.
I'm high on Bo Nix this week. I'm going with Bo Nix.
All right, Bo Nix for you. I'd go Darnold, but all close. Running back, pick 3 out of Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, James Cook, Zach Charbonnet, or Chase Brown. Assume that no Ken Walker in this scenario, Heath.
So Chase Brown and Zach Charbonnet are the easy ones, and I would go with James Cook.
I would agree. Next question. Foster wants to know, TJ Hawkinson, Hunter Henry, Brent Strange. Dan, which tight end do you like the best in PPR?
You know what? I'm going Brenton Strange. The matchup's good. His role is good within this offense. Give me Strange.
I would go with Strange as well, which is strange to say, but we're in a strange season and a strange time, so hopefully Strange is good in Week 16. Next question. Bless your heart. Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, or James Conner need to in full PPR, Heath?
I do not. Are we still playing your game? This is awful. I would sit Conner.
You'd sit Conner here. I'm probably going to sit Achane, to be honest with you, just because Conner, I think, could absolutely dominate the Panthers. But Gibbs is the easy one. All right, next question. Half PPR start 3 running backs: Rico Dowdle, Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving. Dan, I'd probably assume who you're going to leave out here, but who's the odd man out of this? These 4 guys?
Josh Jacobs is easy in. I am actually, you know what? I'm actually going to leave out Rico Dowdle. We discussed the matchup. It's a surprise, but this Bucks defense is playing really good, specifically on the interior. I think they could actually shut down the run game, and Dowdle's role in the passing game has not been what we wanted.
I would sit Hall.
I would sit Hall as well. Just I can't trust Breece Hall right now, and Dowdle's got 3 straight games of 100 yards, so hopefully keeps it up. All right, make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. Wherever podcasts are found, we'll have more starts and sits for you at the end of the week on Thursday and Friday. We'll have you covered with everything that you need for Week 16. For Dan Schneier, Heath Cummings, and since Robert Turbin won't be joining us for the rest of the regular season, Robert Turbin, our great cast of characters behind the scenes as well. We appreciate all the work that you guys do. Thank you for everybody watching and listening. We'll be back again on Friday for another episode of Fantasy Football Today.